Social media has really transformed the marketing world. Now, executives who are interested in kind of marketing their own careers, and especially executives who are in job search mode, are often encouraged to use marketing best practices for their own career search, essentially to market themselves as a product to be procured by a hiring manager or another company. So, if social media is transforming the way that traditional marketing of products and services works, it stands to reason that it can be an enormously valuable tool also for executives trying to market themselves in their own careers. So this presentation is really about some of those social media marketing best practices and how to use them for your own personal kind of online professional branding. I'm Brian Guido Hassan. I'm a career entrepreneur in the clean tech space. I've founded or joined as an early officer 5 clean tech startups currently working on smart office energy solutions, where we've developed an energy efficiency technology for offices that is poised to take off. I have a technical background, studied computer science and electrical engineering at Rice University. Got my MBA in kind of global management and leadership at IMD in Lausanne, Switzerland, and then also kind of returned to academia as an entrepreneur in residence and professor of entrepreneurship at Rice University, where we've been able to build up one of the top entrepreneurship programs in the United States. What you'll notice is that I didn't say anywhere out here that I'm a social media guru or social media expert, because the world has millions of people claiming to be social media gurus and experts, many of whom I'll contend don't have a whole lot to offer. All I am is a practitioner, someone who's actually been using social media not only for the startups that I've run, but also for my own professional online branding. And so this is just based on my own kind of empirical evidence of what seems to work and what doesn't. What I'd like to do is first talk about social media abstractly, kind of talk about social media best practices, how to be effective using social media to market traditional products and services, and then use some of those best practices in the next section to talk about how we can actually market ourselves, how executives can kind of achieve their own professional branding goals using those same best practices. Those first 2 topics are somewhat strategic in nature, so then I'd also like to wrap up with some specific tactics, kind of a step-by-step goals for really getting running on using LinkedIn, which is one of the primary weapons in an executive's professional branding arsenal. I will use myself as a case study in several cases, not because I'm the be-all, end-all success story of using social media for professional online branding, but just because I'm intimately familiar with my own case study. So the first question is, there's all this hullabaloo about social media and how it's transforming marketing, but why is that? Is there actually some substance there? And there is. Social media has generally been found to be a lower cost, kind of higher return way of reaching marketing audiences and achieving marketing goals. So you can be much more targeted with social media because you know much more about the audience that's actually receiving your messages. If you do it right, you can actually foster the rapid viral spread of those messages such that for the same cost of a very small campaign, you might be able to reach orders of magnitude larger audiences. You can also let your users and brand advocates generate some of the marketing value for you. Instead of you always promoting your own product or your own service, you can let others promote it for you, which can be much more effective. And in so doing, you can actually build up kind of strong, defensible brands and communities of brand advocates to help kind of protect your brand equity. And that's something that you almost just can't buy using traditional sorts of media. And there are great examples of companies, even big companies, who have used social media to this kind of really positive effect. So GE is a great one that comes to mind. Uh, Even just a few years ago, GE was viewed as a very kind of stodgy, industrial, kind of dirty brand. But using social media, especially around their Eco-Magination campaign, they've really established a kind of a new identity of being very green, very innovative, and appealing to kind of the next generation of consumers and employees. So that's you'd expect the social media success stories to be these kind of young avant-garde companies, but even the big incumbents are able to use it with great success. And wouldn't it be nice if we could always get low cost, high return benefits without some kind of risk? But there are risks to using social media. I mean, the very reason that you have the benefits of being able to achieve those high returns at low cost, just because there's kind of a low threshold to getting a message out there and having it propagate, also creates a risk. You know, if it's easy for you to get a message out about your product or service, it's also easy for others to get a message out about your product or service. So you could actually lose control of your brand, um, maybe just because you're internally your company isn't kind of promoting it as well as they should, or they have some missteps, or even worse, you could even empower your competitors or detractors to destroy some of your brand equity. And as many success stories as there are in social media, there are also epic fail stories. So some that come to mind are BP during the BP oil spill. BP, of course, was trying to do PR damage control, but there arose a Twitter account called BP Global PR, which of course had no official affiliation with BP, and all they were doing was tweeting very derogatory and humorous messages about BP as if they were coming from the actual kind of head of PR who didn't care about the huge damage to the environment that the oil spill was causing. But here's the rub. The BP Global PR fake account had more than 10 times as many followers as the actual BP Twitter account, the official account, and so was able to cause significant damage to BP's brand. Kenneth Cole, likewise, they didn't face a threat from an external tweeter. They kind of destroyed their brand equity from inside. During the Arab Spring, as riots were going on in Egypt, someone on Kenneth Cole's Twitter account tweeted that, "Oh wow, these people in Egypt sure are excited about something. Must be Kenneth Cole's sale on this line of shoes." And just given the sensitive nature of what was happening in the Arab Spring, that was seen as very poor form, and so they lost a lot of kind of customer value and customer loyalty because of one misstep of a tweet, even after they had deleted it. U.S. Airways, similarly, there was a customer service rep at U.S. Airways who was manning the U.S. Airways official Twitter account and was engaged in an online Twitter dialogue with a dissatisfied customer, someone who had had a flight delay, as happens. And at some point, it's hard to tell whether this was intentional or whether this was a mistake. That customer service rep tweeted back a picture, an online picture, which I've not included on this presentation because it's not safe for work, but a picture, extremely obscene picture, and telling the customer that that's where the person could kind of stick her complaints about the U.S. Airways service. So once again, when people at U.S. Airways found out that had happened, they went and immediately deleted the tweet, deleted the post. But once it's out there on the internet, it is out there for good, and it had already been retweeted publicly numerous times, went very viral, and caused serious harm to U.S. Airways' already kind of flagging reputation. So the upside is tremendous with social media, but there are risks if you don't do it right. So there's the question, well, how do you do it right? How do you maximize that upside and minimize the risks? So I've distilled out what I call kind of 5 golden rules from my own practice of social media. And they're pretty simple. The first is to target the right audiences with the appropriate media. Now, that's nothing new. Even using traditional media, you want to get your targeting right. You wouldn't try to sell children's cereal via commercials during a late night adult programming, right? You try to sell children's cereal during commercials on Saturday morning cartoons. So you want to get the kind of the media mix aligned with the right audience. But something that's maybe not as tied to traditional media best practices is that social media really allows you to tell a story. Since the dawn of time, humans have really been engaged and compelled by storytelling. And because it's inexpensive and easy to get kind of marketing messages out there, you don't have to, using social media, you don't have to focus on, kind of one big monolithic advertisement. Instead, you can put one message out there and then another and then another and then another. And over the course of time, actually create a story arc that, consumers or, potential consumers can really begin to follow and be engaged by. But while you're telling that story, it's absolutely crucial that you have to be transparent, you have to be open and honest, because again, the internet is the internet is smart, right? And when the internet figures out that you have been dishonest or you have misrepresented something, it's just as easy and even more likely in some cases that a message about you being a scam artist or you being fraudulent will propagate virally than the original message that you're trying to get out there. So it's important really to kind of show all of your cards when messaging on social media. Another thing that's really interesting about social media versus traditional media is it's a multi-directional communication medium. It's not just about broadcasting your messages. It's actually also about listening to what the consumer is saying. So often the term that's bandied about for social media is that it's really a conversation with your consumers as opposed to just a one-way kind of talking at them. And then finally, and here again, this is no different than in traditional media, you can't manage what you don't measure. So it's really important in social media to measure the efficacy of your actions, to try things, to measure how well they went, and then to adjust your strategy. Now, the nice thing, though, about social media is that it makes that much easier and more effective. Often if you were engaging in traditional media like print publications or television advertising or radio advertising, it was hard necessarily to draw a very causal relationship between what you had done and the specific effects of that action. Whereas with social media and using kind of web analytical tools, that kind of cycle of kind of try, measure, learn and adapt is much faster, and you have, frankly, just much more confidence in the results of what you're measuring. Now at IMD, so I first gave this presentation at IMD Business School for the MBA students who, of course, are in their job searches right now and eager for every weapon that they can have in their arsenal. And there's a professor at IMD named Michael Wade who has a framework that he's developed for social media success called SICK. You want your social media strategy to be SICK. It's got to be segmented. You want to be targeting the right customers with the right kind of applications. Implementation really matters. You can't just throw it out there and assume that it'll work. And here again, he cites multiple kind of failure stories on social media. He contends that there's kind of a critical mass threshold that if you can achieve, you have kind of a virtuous cycle after that. So 5,000 total followers or 100 kind of really engaged consumers in the conversation. And then he also focuses a lot on knowledge integration. Here again, it comes back to the measurement piece. So even at IMD with kind of a different thought leader focused on researching social media success stories at the corporate level, he's come to a pretty similar set of kind of rules and guidelines for social media success. So there's some great social media success stories out there. Zappos was an excellent example. Before they were acquired, this was a very new way to buy shoes, and because it was an online way, it was kind of targeting a much higher tech, kind of more early adopter style shopper, and so they used Twitter as a major communication medium because Twitter at that time was also very kind of avant-garde, very early adopter, techie focused. But they didn't just tweet out, "Oh, hey, we're having a sale on this shoe or that shoe." And they made it really personal. The CEO and founder of Zappos was actually telling a lot of the story of what was happening behind the scenes, what was happening in their supply chain, what was happening, some of their crazy customers like this tweet, customers in Antarctica. It was really interesting stuff. And as a consequence, they ended up not just with one-time customers, but with a really engaged constituency who was following them, and of course, became much much more likely to become repeat customers instead of one-time customers. Blendtec was a was a great story as well. There are probably few things more boring than trying to sell blenders, right? Who cares about blenders? And they knew that. They were trying to get their message out, and not many people were really all that concerned about um, the quality of the blender. And frankly, there just weren't that many people searching online for blenders. But in the kind of mid to late 2000s, there were a lot of people searching online for the iPhone, for example, or the Google, Android phone, the G1. And so they decided to take those things that people were searching for and stick them in their blenders and make videos of those things being blended. So A, it was just somewhat hilarious because, the who's blending an iPhone? B, it attracted a lot of attention to their videos because people were searching for these other devices and then would kind of stumble upon a video of those devices being blended up in a blender. But then C, when people were there, they said, "Wow, that's pretty impressive that that blender can blend up some consumer electronics. That's even harder than ice." And so their sales, they were actually able to attribute about a 5 times increase in sales just to this YouTube campaign. That's pretty phenomenal. I don't think people would ever attribute a 5 times increase in sales to any traditional media marketing efforts, and especially not at the low cost that went into making these YouTube videos. Starbucks took a slightly different tack, using social media not necessarily to increase sales per se, but really to kind of entrench the loyalty of their repeat customers. And they did this by really kind of opening up their doors and saying, "Look, we have a number of different ways we can go in the future. There are a number of strategic moves Starbucks could make. What do you think, consumers? How can we best serve you moving forward?" And so A, they got a lot of great market intelligence out of that, but B, they really created a culture of customers feeling invested in the future success of Starbucks. And that's obviously phenomenal for long-term brand loyalty. Now, in the United States, utility companies, and especially companies that provide cable TV and internet, are just consistently have the lowest customer service ratings of just about any industry. They're almost universally loathed, and everyone has a bad utility story, and ultimately they usually just change. Customer churn is very high. They'll usually just kind of change to a competitor when they have a bad experience. So Comcast actually noticed that people were trashing Comcast all the time on Twitter, especially. And so they decided to experiment with putting some of their employees out on Twitter and listening. And when they found people trashing Comcast because they'd had a bad experience, they reached out to them to say, "Hey, I'm sorry you've been having a bad experience. What can I do to kind of help you have a better experience?" And I don't know if they actually were able to resolve those customers' problems in any way better than they would have normally. But I think at least just feeling like they were being heard and having a bit of an apology from the company made consumers feel much better. And so their customer churn rate actually went down dramatically simply by employing a couple of people to be on Twitter kind of listening. So that's a great success in an industry where that customer churn rate really, really matters. Of course, probably the most canonical example of social media success is the Old Spice Man. It's now been several years since the Old Spice Man commercials debuted, but Old Spice was a a flagging brand. They were just kind of losing a little more market share every year, and they needed something to reinvigorate the brand, especially with younger consumers. And so they created this Old Spice Man commercial. I think originally there were 4 to 8 different online videos that they put out on YouTube. They were funny videos, so they were easy to go viral, and it was amazing. They actually increased their sales in more than 100% in 1 month. 1 month. So again, using traditional media, I'd be hard pressed to find any examples of being able to have that kind of immediate impact to a company's bottom line, and especially not for the low cost of producing and marketing some YouTube videos. But what Old Spice did that was really smart is wasn't just using the YouTube videos to kind of engage a new generation, but they used the YouTube videos also to learn about their audience. So at the same time that they were generating millions of views of each video, they were learning a little bit about the demographics and psychographics of the types of viewers who seemed to be liking, video 1 versus video 4, and they used that information to drive some of their choices using more traditional media, because then they ultimately did debut those or move those commercials to television advertising, but they chose, one video to air on the Super Bowl as a Super Bowl commercial, but it was one specifically that they had found by using YouTube was resonating with kind of young and middle-aged males. They might have used a different video in a different kind of advertising context based on the different demographics and psychographics. So that was an incredibly significant success story, not just from YouTube, but also how it helped them optimize their traditional media. Okay, so if you believe me that social media can be, if you do it right, a very powerful marketing tool, then let's kind of turn that lens in on our own careers and discuss how we can best use those same practices to enhance, our own professional online branding. So that's the same question, why can social media be valuable for online professional branding? And the answer is essentially the same. You can be highly targeted with the messages we reach, as opposed to, splattercasting a CV or a resume out to anyone who will take it. There can be rapid viral spread of messages that are positive about you and your capabilities, and you can let other users generate a value for you, kind of recommend your capabilities, and ultimately kind of defend you against potential attack. And so, here's my kind of online professional brand, Brian Guido Hasson, the global clean tech entrepreneur. But just as with social media marketing of products and services, there are also risks with social media marketing of your online professional brand. So that's me, my professional face, my persona that I'd like the professional world to see. But here is a picture on Facebook from Halloween several years ago, and I was dressed up as He-Man and, possibly a little intoxicated at this party. That's not that's not necessarily coherent with the brand of Brian Guido Hasson, the global clean tech entrepreneur. That's not the side of me that I want to show to potential hirers or business partners or customers, even potential employees who are looking to join one of my startups. So once again, we have to be careful to maximize the upside while minimizing some of the risk. And to do that, we really use many of the same tools that we'd use for traditional marketing. Now, one approach could be, people get very they freak out a little bit about the risk, about the potential for their online brand to be kind of out of control and out there. And so one strategy could be just completely to remove yourself from the online world. Stay off of any social media, kind of a put your head in the sand kind of strategy. But I submit to you that that's not a valid strategy. I mean, we live in a very connected world. Google knows and exposes a lot of information about every one of us, whether we want it to or not. So if we try to take ourselves offline, and if we don't participate in social media, we still have an online professional brand out there, but we don't control it. It's just kind of whatever pops up whenever someone searches for your name on Google, and that may not be the kind of the side that you want to show. So instead, a more proactive approach, I believe, is much more effective. That way you can actually control what people see when they search for you, and they will, right? I mean, people, if they're trying to hire you, they will search for your name. If they're trying to work with you, they will search for your name. And it's essentially search engine optimization to put your best foot forward out there. So as an example, if you search for me, now I happen to have a pretty unique name, but if you search for Brian Hasson or certainly Brian Guido Hasson, the entire first page of results you have are coherent with my online professional brand, right? It's my publicly facing blog, my LinkedIn profile, some kind of websites that track different executives and entrepreneurs out there, public profile that I have in a couple other places. But this is right. This is what I want people to see when they search for me. There may still be some funky wonky stuff that's out there, but it's several pages deep in the search, so people would really have to want to find it in order to get there. Yeah, so once again, we can really use the same best practices to be proactive about kind of managing our online brand presence using social media. And I'll delve into each of those in a little bit more detail than we did for traditional products and services. So it's impossible to be present in all social media, and certainly impossible to do it well in all social media. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of social media platforms out there, and you can't be all things to all people. So you need to take a very targeted approach based on your own unique profile and your kind of goals for your online professional branding. So here I've taken a subset of kind of 5 different types of social media. Professional networks like LinkedIn, personal networks like Facebook, content publishing like blogs and microblogging, content sharing where you might kind of find something that you didn't create but you think is interesting and share it with others, and then media publishing of audio, visual, different types of media. And so someone with one career might choose a different media mix than someone with another career. So for example, someone in kind of traditional industry might be present on LinkedIn. It's really emerged as kind of the de facto online resume. Might wish to establish some thought leadership in his particular industry or particular job function within that industry. So might use one of Google's tools like Blogger to kind of blog on those subjects. It might use something like StumbleUpon to discover other articles that are relevant to that person's industry or geography or function, and then kind of share them with other people who are interested in those same topics. But someone who is in more of a techie space might choose a different media mix. Might be present on Google+, which is generally seen as a little bit kind of nerdier of a social network, but also one where you can kind of establish a professional brand like LinkedIn. Probably on Facebook. Facebook has this kind of hacker mentality, and so someone in the tech field would probably be on Facebook. May have a blog, but instead of using the Google kind of blogging platform, might use WordPress, which is just a little kind of sexier and a little kind of more out there in the techie community. And certainly will be on Reddit because all the nerds are on Reddit for sure. But then someone very different might be someone in the entertainment industry might be even different. So MySpace, the personal network that everyone forgot about, is actually still alive and kicking in the entertainment industry, especially for music groups. Certainly someone in the entertainment industry will be on Twitter because you've got to be tweeting all the time, letting your kind of followers and fans know what you're up to and kind of how your story is unfolding. And then probably you're on Instagram or YouTube because you've got some kind of cool videos or pictures to be showing about your crazy rock star lifestyle. Right, so my point with this slide isn't to prescribe that someone with this career should necessarily have this, and this different social networks. It's just to show that for different people with different goals and in different kind of career contexts, a different media mix will help them target a little bit more effectively and efficiently. So traditional paper resumes and CVs are, not very effective, right? You've probably all heard the statistics about, 99.99999% of them are, discarded immediately upon receipt. Just either filed away, never again to see the light of day, or just kind of tossed into the waste bin. And online CVs are, it's great because you can email someone a resume. You don't have to put as much effort into it, so you can probably email more people, but probably has just as high, if not higher, level of seen once and then discarded immediately. Um, but moreover, these are really static. These are boring. They present a, an insight into you and your career and your online professional brand that's just a snapshot in a moment of time. Conversely, your online professional brand is much more dynamic. It changes over time and it changes quite immediately. Even if someone received some information about you 6 months ago, might go back to see you again, say on your LinkedIn profile, and see that you've accomplished something since then, or you've had a major change since then. And so, again, this gets back to this notion of telling a story. An online professional brand should be kind of updated frequently, and then not only can people see that story being told, not only can they kind of follow along your story arc, they can even participate in that. They can kind of comment on it or share it and become kind of players in that story as well. So the traditional kind of resume approach, where you send out a resume to hiring managers, is kind of push marketing, right? You're out there trying to use a direct sales approach. Whereas your online professional brand is really pull marketing. You're trying to create something compelling and captivating that relevant targeted people, whether they're hiring managers or business partners, what have you, can actually follow along and ultimately become very engaged. So the obvious way to do that is by updating your status on the social networks where you're present, especially on LinkedIn for professional reasons. You land a client, you give a talk or a presentation. Those are great things to be able to throw out there on LinkedIn. But there are other tools as well that I think really help kind of tell the story almost for free. You don't have to invest a whole lot in those tools. They just kind of connect automatically, to your Gmail account, for example, or to your LinkedIn profile, and then they do a lot of the legwork of telling that story for you. So SlideShare is a great example. That's basically just an online repository for PowerPoint or PDF presentations that you develop. And so if you have non-confidential information to share that you think is valuable, you thought you did a good market analysis, or you thought you made a good sales pitch, you could put it out there on SlideShare, and then not only can people who are already following you take a look at the quality of your work product, but people who are interested in those topics can actually discover your content and ultimately discover you, which can be very valuable. TripIt also, I think, is pretty cool. It just kind of shows the different places that you're traveling, and that's it's a great story to tell if you travel frequently, especially to interesting places for business. And then there's Shelfari and Goodreads, both of which were actually acquired by Amazon, and those are great ways to share information about what you're reading. So if you're reading some nonfiction about leadership or business or marketing, things like that, this can be great because then people are actually able to see that you're invested in kind of self-improvement. But I think it's okay also to share the fiction stuff that you're doing. Again, humans are kind of compelled by stories of other humans, and seeing that, oh, hey, so and so is interested in nerdy fiction just as I am, it might actually create a bond that, or at least a talking point that you can use when you meet someone. But I think it's important not just to put your successes out there. There's this tendency to create kind of a very rosy persona in online media. So if you go on Facebook, if you go on my Facebook feed, it would seem that everyone I know is really happy, has beautiful families and children, is enjoying nothing but professional career success, and that's that's not really the life that everyone leads. So I think it's really helpful actually to share some of the downsides. If you lost a client, or if you didn't achieve a goal that you were hoping for, even a worry that you might have, a concern about, in my case, the future of my startup, for example. Those really help humanize you, and I think people are ultimately more kind of compelled by that kind of open and more balanced story, such that that they might be more likely to really to engage with you in the future. But moreover, I think you'll actually be surprised how many people, when they see a post like that, will actually line up to help you out. I made a couple posts like that before, and I was actually really moved by how many people responded immediately, not just with encouragement, but with specific, actionable things that they would propose to do that actually would really help me in that situation. So you don't have to be out there posting, "Hey, I'm really dumb. I'm not good at my job," what have you. That may take it a bit to the extreme, but posting sometimes when you fail, and maybe also what you learned or how you plan to kind of bounce back from that failure, I think can be really compelling as you're telling your story. And once again, social media is not a unidirectional medium. It gives you the opportunity not only to talk, but also to listen. So your brand can really be interactive. So you can participate in communities that are relevant for your online brand, which just increases your brand's credibility because you're kind of out there in the space, visibly active in the space that you claim to be kind of competent in. But it also kind of keeps your finger on the pulse of what's going on in your area, whether it's your industry or your job function, and it helps you stay abreast of what other people are thinking in the same area. And at the same time, if you're active in those kind of discussions, it kind of promotes your brand to potential hiring managers in those job functions or in that industry. Moreover, you also have the opportunity not only to listen kind of for market research, but to listen in terms of researching people whom you might be meeting with. It's almost inexcusable in this day and age to walk into a meeting with someone without knowing an awful lot about that person's background. You don't have to go stalk someone and find out the favorite color and how many kids he has and when their birthdays are, but the basic information about the person's role, how that role has evolved over time within that company, previous professional experience, where the person went to school, different places the person might have worked. That's all really easily obtainable information and just can help make a first meeting with someone much more impactful. There's a great tool out there that I'll recommend called Rapportive, which I believe was acquired by LinkedIn. And it's basically just a window that sits in your inbox, whether it's Gmail or Outlook or what have you. And just any email that comes into your inbox, it kind of cross-references the email address of the sender with profiles like LinkedIn or Google Plus or Facebook, so that you can kind of see who it is who's actually sending you emails. If you're like me and you get a bunch of emails from people whom you maybe haven't you met once at a conference or what have you, it may not ring a bell, the person's name or email address, but when you see the LinkedIn profile, it will. But B also just helps you, if you're crafting a response to someone, maybe be a little bit more targeted and poignant with that response. So there's also a great opportunity in terms of listening to use content that other people create to to create some value for your own brand. So staying abreast of kind of articles and web pages that are relevant to your area can be and then taking those and kind of retweeting them or reposting them on a different social network can be pretty valuable. It helps establish that you are really interested and maybe even expert in your space. There are some good tools out there. I use one called Prismatic, which knows my interests, and so each day I check Prismatic, and it kind of shows me the most relevant news based on those interests, and that helps me discover a lot of content. And there are a number of other kind of content discovery engines. At the same time, I think it's really helpful if you're trying to establish your kind of expertise to be present in social networks like Quora, which has kind of established itself as the dominant question and answer forum out there on the web. And so I'm out there on Quora answering questions sometimes about entrepreneurship, about clean tech, about things that really kind of support and bolster my brand. And when I do that, and when people vote up my answers, it essentially provides some very visible validation that people regard me as someone who knows a lot about global clean tech entrepreneurship. And when it comes to measurement, I think it's easy to fall into a trap of measuring the wrong things. That's the case, in just about anything, but maybe especially in social media. It's easy just to focus on, well, how many followers do I have, or how many friends do I have, or how many connections do I have? But those metrics aren't actually meaningful for you unless you can, activate them. There's kind of a quality versus quantity kind of approach. So you might choose different metrics for different social media in which you're present. If you have a website or blog, something like Google Analytics, to measure not just how many people are visiting your blog, but also their behavior. Are they staying on your blog for a while? How much time are they spending? How many different pages are they going to? Or are they kind of clicking away within seconds, realizing that your blog isn't all that useful for them? On Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, there's some kind of more sophisticated tools that we'll discuss on the next couple of slides. But LinkedIn in particular allows you some pretty interesting insights into kind of who's looking at your profile, and provides you some actionable information that you can use actually to optimize your profile. So there's a great tool out there called Klout. Klout started with the kind of the grand ambition really to measure social influence across all social media. And I think they were really hoping that Klout score would become the be-all, end-all metric that everyone would use and try to optimize for. And it hasn't really panned out that way for them. They're in the process of kind of pivoting their business model and their product offering a little bit. But they do provide a useful service to measure essentially your influence online. So if you put a message out there and you have 10,000 followers, it's still not all that useful if none of those 10,000 followers sits up and takes notice. So they measure kind of how frequently you're communicating, what happens with that communication. There's some great examples of people like Bill Gates who don't communicate very frequently, or John Doerr. They only maybe a couple of posts a week, but when they do, a lot of eyeballs are looking at and even resharing those posts. So as with most things that try to create kind of a be-all, end-all number, the be-all, end-all number isn't that important in and of itself. It's the drill down kind of sub-metrics that Klout provides, which can really help you kind of adjust and optimize your social media efforts. There's another tool, essentially a competitor, called Peer Index, which is, I believe, is basically the European answer to Klout. Pretty similar. They try to provide kind of a single holistic metric, but then they also provide a breakdown of the different topics where you seem to be kind of more or less influential, which can help you kind of optimize some of your marketing efforts. So once again, Michael Wade's 6 criteria apply to kind of your own online professional branding just as much as they apply to a big corporate trying to use social media for a product or a service. And there's some great success stories of people using social media for online professional branding. Justin Bieber, I may not be a fan of his music, but clearly he was able to leverage a YouTube presence into a huge career move. Now that he's kind of imploding, that's also happening very visibly on social media, but he at least got to prominence through social media. That won't always work. It's tough to see if artists like Rebecca Black, who has more than 170 million YouTube views for her terrible song Friday. Not sure yet if she'll be able to parlay that into any kind of long-term career success, but still, it's pretty amazing that she's able to go from complete obscurity into someone who, in the kind of her career in the entertainment industry, became really prominent, even if only for a moment. Several years ago, there was an aspiring kind of New York ad exec named Alec Bronstein who really wanted to work for one of the top 5 ad firms in New York. Um, and that's really hard to do. They're relatively small firms. They don't hire a lot. Once people are in, they tend to stay kind of for life. And so it was really just kind of hard to break into one of those firms. But he had a hypothesis that because he liked to Google himself every once in a while and just kind of see what was out there about him, he hypothesized that the kind of top advertising execs in those firms would do the same thing. So he kind of thought outside the box a little bit and actually used Google AdWords, which is Google's kind of gives you the ability to purchase advertising whenever people search for specific words. And so he bought Google AdWords for the names of each of the top 5 advertising execs in New York City. And you can see here, the ad comes up and says, hey, whatever your name is, Googling yourself is a lot of fun and hiring me is fun too. And so out of those 5 advertising execs, he got 4 interviews and actually 2 job offers, which again, he completely kind of hacked the system and bypassed the usual pipeline to get into one of those firms. Now that this has been done, it's probably hard just to replicate this and do it again, but it does speak to the importance of thinking outside the box and using some of the new capabilities that social media offers versus traditional media. I mean, can you imagine how expensive it would have been if he had tried to purchase TV advertising for, hey, top New York ad firm execs, please hire me if you happen to be watching Letterman on Thursday night. So again, I'll throw myself out there. My goal for online professional branding has been to establish myself as kind of a global clean tech entrepreneur. And if you search for global clean tech entrepreneur, the first several results that you'll find will be me. Now, I'm not sure there are that many people out there searching for global clean tech entrepreneurs, but it's nice that, when they are, they're finding me. But my presence, my online branding on social media actually did have a pretty tangible effect for me with this current startup, for example. So when I was starting this company, I was posting like crazy on just about all of my social media networks about what I was doing. I was doing a lot of market analysis. I was doing a lot of kind of customer discovery and customer development. I was kind of putting together different ways that we might go to market. I was putting together a kind of a bit of a funding and financing plan. And I was hitting milestones left and right, and I was keeping my network aware of it because for many of them, that was actually kind of interesting. They didn't have too many people in their networks who were starting companies, especially not people who were maybe as passionate about kind of saving the world through clean tech and innovative capitalism as I was. And then a really interesting, surprising, and humbling thing happened when I eventually posted that kind of the doors were open and we were going to start raising our first round of funding. A number of people in my network actually reached out to me and said, hey, I've never invested in a startup before, but I really believe in what you're doing, and I've been really kind of compelled by the story of the success you've achieved so far. I'd love to invest. And so, again, it's quite humbling, quite flattering. But moreover, as anyone who has ever raised capital for a startup will know, if you can create inbound, kind of pull marketing interest in investing in your round, it's infinitely easier than kind of beating the path, kind of running the VC circuit and trying to kind of use push marketing, trying to sell your deal. So that was really valuable and really helpful for me. There are, of course, just as many, if not more, examples, though, of social media fail stories for online professional branding. Self-published authors use kind of web marketing and social media marketing almost exclusively to get their name out there. They don't have Random House Publishing or Penguin Publishing out there with marketing their book and creating PR tours. So they really have to create awareness of their self-published books using online channels. And so Jacqueline Howitt was someone who was out there. She had a book. Maybe it wasn't even her first one, but on Amazon, where she had self-published, she had received one or maybe a couple of negative reviews of that book, people calling her out for poor grammar and spelling mistakes and things like that. And so instead of kind of embracing the feedback, taking them for the feedback, maybe making a change or politely disagreeing with it, or even ignoring it altogether, she got really catty and got into essentially a flame war with some of these users, using some caustic language, calling them idiots. You told them they didn't know what they were talking about because they didn't like her book. And of course, that ultimately created kind of career suicide, right? Everyone who saw that exchange immediately discounted the notion of ever buying this crazy author's book. And of course, later when she cooled down, she kind of went back and removed those inflammatory comments. But once again, the damage had already been done, and there were countless kind of repostings of those comments on kind of the major online forums that are used to help connect self-published authors with people who are looking to buy books from kind of these less noted authors. So, great example of how a little bit of poor judgment in the social media space can really have a long-term detrimental effect. Now, once again, we can talk strategy all day long, but at the end of the day, especially if you're relatively new to social media, what matters a lot more are maybe some specifics around different tools. And LinkedIn is probably the most prominent tool for online professional branding for careers. So what follows are a few steps just really to kind of get running with LinkedIn. The first is, before you really start going out and connecting with people or driving people to your LinkedIn profile, make sure you actually have a good brand destination of your LinkedIn profile. Make sure people will actually get something valuable out of visiting your LinkedIn profile. So you can kind of keep it in stealth mode until then. It's beyond the scope of this presentation really to detail what makes a good LinkedIn profile. There are, search for it. There are a number of articles out there. But make sure that you take at least the basic minimum steps before you start trying to get your cart ahead of the horse. Once you have a good LinkedIn profile, then it's important to start connecting with other people, because your network is what really makes LinkedIn valuable. But I encourage you to focus on quality of that network rather than quantity. The number of connections you have on LinkedIn really doesn't matter. You can have 1 million LinkedIn connections, but if you can't activate them, if they're not going to be useful or helpful for you, there's no real point in having them. So as a rule, I try to connect with only with people on LinkedIn with whom I have a pre-existing kind of real relationship in the real world. So people who will actually vouch for me and vice versa. And that's still actually a significant number of people, and it grows over time. And then back to the notion of letting some of your brand advocates create some value for you. As soon as you have some network built up, ask for recommendations. You can, I think with a single button click, you can actually ask all of your network to recommend you for specific skills. So in my case, for example, you see the top skills that people have recommended me for are startups, entrepreneurship, clean tech. I mean, these are very much what I want to be associated with as someone who's trying to brand himself as a global clean tech entrepreneur. And again, there's just something a little more seen as a little more valid when other people are recommending you for a specific skill set rather than just you touting that skill set yourself. There are 1 million groups on LinkedIn, and you can join 1 million of them if you'd like, but I think it's helpful really to join targeted ones that help support your online brand. So in my case, most of the groups that I'm part of are either groups for alumni of the academic institutions that I've attended, or they're groups that are really focused on energy, especially clean energy, clean tech, kind of startup entrepreneurship. Now, so once you've developed a bit of a network, and once you're kind of present in your groups, then you can actually search for people who might actually be helpful for you to know. Now, whether those are potential sales leads because you're trying to sell something, potential business partners, potential hiring managers. I mean, there are a number of reasons why you might want to find people that are relevant to your industry or your geography or your particular job function. And LinkedIn has a good advanced search that allows you really to kind of filter by all of those criteria and more. I think if you're a free user of LinkedIn, your search is somewhat limited. But if you buy even the lowest priced Premier membership, which I think is $250, and in my mind is completely worth it, you then have access to search not only through your first degree connections, but through many connections, and get a significant number of additional search results. And this is another reason why you should be part of groups, because group members are one of the areas that you can search. Now, if you're reaching out to someone whom you don't know, or even if it's someone you do know, I strongly discourage you from sending LinkedIn's default connection request. By default, it'll just say, "I'd like to add you to my professional network," signed your name. Now, I get probably at least 10 of those requests a day, and I'm not even a very important person. So I imagine people like hiring managers, people who make major purchase decisions are probably getting even many more than that. And so if you want to differentiate yourself from the myriad just default connection requests that they're receiving, make sure to add a little bit of information about who you are and why you would like to connect with someone. It doesn't have to be a long motivation letter. In fact, I think it's somewhat limited in number of characters or number of words. So really be concise and punchy, but create a reason why it might be worthwhile for that person to have a conversation with you. Even if it's someone you do know, but if it's someone you know really well, maybe you can just do that. If it's someone you know but not that well, I think it's still important, because again, it might not be someone who recognizes your name or your face immediately, but especially if it's someone you don't know. But even moreover, if it's someone you don't know, instead of using the just kind of default connection method, LinkedIn has a great tool that will allow you to request an introduction to someone through some kind of mutual acquaintance, through a mutual network. And so this type of warm introduction to someone has a much higher chance of actually getting the person to respond favorably than just kind of a cold connection request. So, for example, Barack Obama could be really helpful to me in my business, right? Dear Barack, please put a law into effect that requires all offices to engage in, energy efficiency measures. But if I were just trying to connect with Barack Obama, I can't imagine that he would just accept my connection. If, on the other hand, we had some kind of mutual friend who could actually vouch for me, say, "Hey, Barack, buddy, you should really connect with Brian. He's got some really interesting ideas that could help create jobs," which is something that you really care about. Then he might sit up and take notice. Now, I'm using Barack Obama as kind of a facetious example, but I think that really, the metaphor really works for a number of other kind of business leaders, hiring managers, et cetera. Moreover, kind of looking at it from the other perspective, so every day I probably have someone who asks me, "Hey, Brian, do you know someone in this industry or in this job function or what have you that you can connect me with?" And for me to kind of really sit down and think about that, or even kind of go through my LinkedIn network and look through it and see which people I have, who might meet those criteria, and that's hard. That takes a lot of time, and it's as an entrepreneur who's already completely overconsumed with all of the things that I'm trying to do for my startup. That's the type of thing that won't usually bubble up to the top of my priority list. However, if that same person takes the time to look through, is connected with me on LinkedIn and can therefore look through my connections, him or herself, and then make a proactive introduce me request, say, "Hey, Brian, I found this one person or these 3 people in your network. Could you please introduce me? Here's a little kind of introductory email," then it makes it trivially easy for me to help. I can literally just click a button and pass that introduction along. Although in that case, because it's so easy, I'm more likely not just to click the button, but to add a few sentences of endorsement for that person as well. So the introduce me feature, I think, is incredibly powerful in LinkedIn and should always be used instead of the just kind of blind connection request if possible. And what's really cool about LinkedIn as well is you can do a lot of market intelligence about your own kind of online professional brand. Here again, I think you're limited in what you can see if you're just a free user, but you can see a lot more if you're a pro user. Here's a snapshot, an old snapshot. The dashboard's changed a little bit, but of my kind of brand, online professional brand dashboard from LinkedIn, which is showing me who is viewing my profile. Sometimes it'll show me, the actual person's name, or depending on that person's privacy settings, it might at least tell me kind of what area that person's in, either geographically or in job function or in industry, or which company that person works for. And you can see I could also kind of track total views, how that's fluctuating over time of my profile, and the search keywords that people are using to find my profile. And that's particularly interesting if I'm trying to brand myself as a global clean tech entrepreneur. Here you can see that there's not a whole lot of global or clean tech or anything like that on my top search keywords. So that might give me the insight that I should kind of experiment with changing some of the keywords in my profile, and then go back and see if the top search keywords change over time to be more in line with the type of interest that I'm looking to attract. Now, as a bonus, LinkedIn, I say, is a phenomenal and very useful tool, but at the end of the day, it still really is kind of just an online resume. And the resume itself is, I won't say it's anachronistic, but it's kind of an online version of something that was created a long time ago with very different tools available. So there's some new tools that are coming out that are trying to take the information that you have in a platform like LinkedIn and do something more interesting with it. So Visualize.me, for example, tries to create kind of a single page snapshot of your career, kind of shows your experience, where you've been working, which different skills you have, where you've been educated, and what. And so it's just kind of trying to make a little bit more of a visual, punchy kind of impression on someone who might be seeing your online professional brand for the first time. I don't think Visualize.me has achieved what it's hoped to with this tool yet. I think they're still kind of looking for the answer. There have been other tools out there that have kind of come and gone. So I think it's safe to say that no one has really kind of cracked this nut yet. But I'm eagerly following this space, hoping that someone will. Because I think it's pretty interesting to kind of have a major paradigm shift in kind of a quantum leap, if I can use another buzzword, from just kind of this very text-based type of resume approach to something that's just a little more modern. So in a nutshell, I've tried to go over kind of the value of social media for marketing traditional products and services, how we can use best practices from social media also to create kind of strong online professional brand experiences for our own kind of careers, and then also delve into some specifics, some tactics to use on LinkedIn, one of the most important platforms for online professional branding. If you have any questions or discussion, please leave them in the comment section of this presentation. You're always welcome to reach out to me on social media, where I'm glad to engage in the conversation. So wishing you all the best with your online professional branding efforts, and may the social media force be with you.